across the world. Perhaps it's the sickness of a child. Perhaps it's financial hardship. Perhaps it's being trapped in a loveless marriage or stuck in a dead-end job, ongoing illness. Maybe it's just the future being unknown and potentially terrible. All these things can make us think, where is God? Is he at work? Does he care? We're all going to go through disasters and tragedies. If they haven't happened yet, they will happen. And they will shock us and shake us. They'll make us ask, does God care? Does God see? Does God know? What will enable us to live, if you're a follower of God, if you're someone who follows Jesus, to live in that kind of time? How will you know that God can be trusted when all the external circumstances look like he can't be? Well, if you have got that question would have been burning for the Israelites. That would have been a burning question for the Israelites in Exodus chapter 1. Because I don't know if you noticed, it's there, and it's the framework for all that's going to unfold in Exodus. But the Israelites were living through a genocide. They were living through a genocide. What's a genocide? It's the deliberate destruction of a people group. And when you look up definitions of genocide, they almost all note that the deliberate destruction of a people group involves the deliberate death of their children. And that was the plan of Pharaoh. Did you hear it? What did he say to the midwives? Every baby boy born must be killed. His plan is ruthless and pitiless. Because it's the men, historically back then, who would be able to defend the women and protect the nation. And so what do? Well, you get rid of the men and you just assimilate the women. They become your breeding stock for your own nation. They get married into your people group. The Israelites were living through a genocide. Imagine the question they would have been asking. Now seems like they didn't know God in the way that they will come to know him. But they certainly would have known him. The story of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, and the story of the people of Israel and how Joseph went down. But 400 years have passed. And in that time, they are slaves and living through a genocide. Does God care? Is God at work? Is anything happening? Well, here's the shocking first point, is that actually, as God fulfills his promise, things get worse. As God fulfills his promise, things get worse. That's the first point. Let's dig into it. So Exodus chapter 1, you want to have it open with you on your phone or an old school Bible. Notice the language there. These are the names of the sons of Israel who went to Egypt with Jacob, each with his family, and then it just gives you all the tribe names. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, well read, Eliza. And then moving to verse 6, it kind of recalls. Now Joseph and all his brothers and all that generation died, but the Israelites were exceedingly fruitful. They multiplied greatly, increased in numbers, and became so numerous that the land was filled with them. And that verse recalls the promises to Abraham. God said to Abraham, I will make you a great nation. And if you remember, poor old Abram, his name means dad. It's an ironic name because he had no children at that point. And then God said to him, actually, I'm going to make your nation so great that I need to change your name from Abram to Abraham, which means big daddy. And he still had no children at that point. But it's unfolding, right? And finally now, Joseph and that generation go. And you find out they're just 70 in number. So what's happening then in verse 6 and 7 is multiplication. God says, I'll make you a great nation. They are becoming a great nation. But they are not yet God's people with God. Verse 8, then a new king, to whom Joseph meant nothing, came power to Egypt. Look, he said to his people, the Israelites have become far too numerous for us. So notice that God is fulfilling his promises. They're getting a greater nation, and that is exactly the reason for the next thing that happens. See it? The Israelites have become too numerous for us. So actually, because God is fulfilling his promises, things get worse, not better. What? What? Verse 10, come, we must deal shrewdly or ruthlessly with them, or they will become even more numerous. And if war breaks out, they will join our enemies, fight against us, and leave the country. So they put slave masters over the people and make them make bricks, forced labour. And they built 2 store cities. But notice the end of verse 12. The more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and they spread. So again, God is fulfilling his promises in the midst of conflict and hardship. But actually it gets worse, right? Because God is fulfilling his promises, look what happens next. They made their lives bitter, verse 14, with harsh labour in brick and mortar and all kinds of work in the fields. In their harsh labour, the Egyptians worked them ruthlessly. If you think the cotton fields of America 300 years ago, well, and not just 300 years ago, sadly, that's that picture. If you've never seen 12 Years a Slave, you should watch it, but have a box of tissues with you. It is awful. That's what the Israelites are going through here. Verse 15. The king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, whose names were Shipara and Puah, when you are helping the Hebrew women during childbirth on the delivery stool, if you see the baby is a boy, kill him. But if it is a girl, let her live. And do you know what? It keeps escalating. It keeps escalating. We're going to come back to the kind of midwives and their bravado. They're like, what? It's because Hebrew women rock. And Egyptian women spend way too much time watching Netflix. But that's not enough. Look how it escalates. God blesses the midwives and they're caught up in the blessings of God and they multiply as it were. But look how it escalates. It goes from, if he is a boy, and it's the midwives who are supposed to do it, to look at verse 22. Then Pharaoh gave this order to all his people. Every Hebrew boy that is born, you must throw into the Nile. But let every girl live. There it is. That's a genocide. Right there. It's unfolding. And here's the shock of the story. It's happening because God is fulfilling his promises. What do we do with that? So here's the usual narrative. That as God is at work in the world, things get better. Things get easier. Life gets more comfortable and more convenient. Things get simpler. Hashtag blessed. Well, here's God blessing, and it's getting worse. What is going on? Well, let me ask you a question. You've got 2 sporting teams on the field. You've got the New Zealand Kiwis, the Ferns, and what are the Australian female netball team called? The Diamonds. The Diamonds playing the Ferns, right? And so the competition heats up and one team starts to win. What are the Diamonds going to do about that? Are they going to play less strongly or more strongly? Yeah, they're going to raise up. So as the Ferns rise, the Diamonds will rise and the conflict will get intense. That's what's going on here. See, as God brings about his purposes and his plans for good, what do you think the world that's pitched against God is going to do? What do you think our sinful flesh is going to do? What do you think Satan is going to do? Step back or step up? See, the pattern here is as God's purposes unfold, as God brings about his goodness and greatness to the world, we should expect conflict. Yes, we should expect goodness and blessing, but it's only half the truth, which is no truth at all. See, God's blessing is not just about our comfort and convenience. It's far greater. The truth here is that God brings about his plans and his purposes, greater things are happening than comfort or convenience. These things are so great they lead to conflict and difficulty. But see, the question will be for the Israelites, will they see that God is at work in this? Or will they think that God doesn't care? See, that's it, isn't it? As the problems increase, or the difficulties increase, you might think, well, hang on, I hope that God would make my life simpler, easier, and smoother. I decided to follow Jesus. I thought it would be #blessed. Now, perhaps it is being #blessed actually because things are getting harder. Could that be possible? Could God be bigger than the God of Instagram? Well, here's what we discover. God is at work. And we'll see this with the salvation of Moses. God is at work. God cares. Dip with me into Exodus chapter 2. Now, a man of the tribe of Levi married a Levite woman, and she became pregnant and gave birth to a son. When she saw that she was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. But when she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him and coated it with tar and pitch. She placed the child in it and put it among the reeds at the bank of the Nile. His sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. Now, I just want you to think about this for a moment. Just think about this story for a moment. I don't know if you've ever read a children's Bible, but if you've ever read a children's Bible and they tell this story of Moses, it's kind of beautiful. There's this like the blue Nile, and there's these reeds, and the sky we painted with this kind of soft English blue. And just stop for a moment and think about this story. Let's imagine Larissa, Rachel's daughter, is a little bit younger. And I decide to get a plastic washing tub and put her in it when she's less than a year old and push her out into the middle of the Salisbury pool over there. How would you be feeling about that? What would you be thinking about that? God, let me know. What would you be thinking? Yeah, Glenn, what are you doing? Yeah, what else would you be thinking? Yeah, she might tip over, she might rock to the side. You'd be thinking, Glenn, what could possibly lead you to put a child in a little plastic tub and put it out into the middle of water? So again, you've got to see how desperate the situation here is in Israel. That Moses' mother, who we don't know his name yet, Moses' mother thinks, here's a plan of safety. Let's stick a child in a basket with pitch and push it out into the Nile, where crocodiles roam. Things are so desperate. This is her plan of salvation. It's an impossible plan. And yet God does the impossible. Do you know the story? The sister stands at a distance to see what will happen. And then, amazingly, Pharaoh's daughter comes down, if you pick it up in verse 5. And then she sees the basket among the reeds. She investigates and she opens it, and there is a Hebrew baby. This is one of the Hebrew babies, she says. And then Moses' sister asks Pharaoh's daughter, shall I go and get one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you? Oh, absolutely. You know, Pharaoh's daughter, she doesn't want to have to do that. And so then in God's amazing salvation, Moses gets raised by his mother still, and she gets paid for it. Did you notice that? She says, nurse him and I will pay you. Wow. I mean, how many mums would love that, right? Just like, yep, nurse my own child and I get paid extra for it. So the woman takes the baby and nurses him. When the child gets older, she took him to Pharaoh's daughter and he became her son. Incredible salvation. God's remarkable salvation of Moses. So what we see here is, in the midst of this, God does the impossible. He can save. He can rescue. And we should never doubt, no matter how difficult or how hard the circumstances are, that God has the power to rescue. God is able to protect his people. That's something that we ought to reflect on in this story. And yet there's a difficulty here, because part of the problem is, what about all the other Hebrew boys? The focus has come off them and onto Moses. But what about the other Hebrew boys? Well, we come to the third part. It's not just salvation to Moses, it's salvation through Moses. Look with me back at chapter 2, verse 1. I just noticed this week, and I was confused, and it became a great insight. Now, a man of the tribe of Levi married a Levite woman, and she became pregnant and gave birth to a son. When she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. Just think about that line for a second. When she saw that he was a beautiful child, she hid him for 3 months. Does that mean that all the Hebrew women, when they gave birth to the son, were like, well, that kid's a bit ugly? Meh! And threw them out because they were ugly? I just read that line and was like, what? What's going on here? Well, actually, it's because the word fine or the word beautiful here is the word good. Tov. Moses is God's goodness shown. See, it's the very same word used when God creates. Genesis 1:4, and God said, let there be light, and there was light, and God saw the light was good, and he separated light from darkness. And it gets used again and again and again. Same word. The creation is good. God's working good. God's bringing good. And so suddenly into this darkness comes this child who is good. But that's not the only connection. Have you always wondered what that last line is doing there? That right at the end, which I didn't read, the child's name is unknown. The child's name is unknown all the way through. And in verse 10, when the child grew older, she took him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses, which is held in tension, saying, I drew him out of the water. Have a listen to Genesis 1, verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty, and darkness was over the waters, the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. See, it's a picture of primeval chaos. That's what's going on there, that actually formless and void and darkness and kind of chaos. And then out of that, out of the waters, God brings what is good. See, the picture in the first chapter is that evil is flourishing. Chaos and evil rule and reign. And God is about to bring his salvation through Moses. And he's going to do it against a context in which evil is powerful and flourishing. And God is going to act to save his people. He's going to bring salvation to his people through Moses. But the hint is very profound here. See, Moses and all that God will do through him is so great. The thing that's happening is so great. It is like a new creation. That's the point that's being made here. What God will do through Moses is not just an ordinary Hebrew boy, but actually an act of great salvation, a new creation. See, what captivity are you in at the moment? And what will enable you to hold on to God when you're in a dark place? When the suffering seems relentless? When it looks like God is perhaps against you and not for you? When it doesn't seem to matter with how much integrity or godliness you act, that wicked people seem to win. And you seem to have no power to change it. No strength, no future, no hope. And you ask, does God care? Is he at work? What we need to see is that God is always at work. God is always at work. Let me kind of draw that in for us now. Throughout this story, this little story, God is always at work. Do you notice he's at work in the protection of the midwives? Ordinary midwives in the heart of the conflict. See, why did they lie? We get worried. Christians, we get a bit worried about the fact that they lied. It wasn't true what they said. Should they have lied? No. But it just underscores that they were ordinary women in an extraordinary, difficult situation. But notice why they lied. Did you see? It's because they feared God. It says they feared God. There it is, verse 17. The midwives, however, feared God. They believed that God was at work. They believed that God was watching. They believed that God was involved. And so therefore how they acted mattered incredibly. God is always at work. They feared God. But see, as God's promises are filled, it will create conflict. It will create a clash of worldviews, a clash of hopes and dreams. And so which Lord will they obey in that rising conflict? Pharaoh, king of all he sees. God, king of all that's seen and unseen. It's the same question that will come to us in difficulty and hardship. Will we capitulate to the way the world wants us to live or the things that are going wrong? Will we give in to fear? Or will we fear God and trust that He's always at work? But that's not the only salvation, is it? God is at work. There's a salvation through Moses, an extraordinary salvation. Do you just reflect on that story for a moment? How God reverses situations. Because that's what you'll see as you trust God. You'll see Him bring great goodness out of the hardship and difficulty you endure. He does this incredible reversal. Who is putting the children to death? Pharaoh. And he's doing it by getting babies thrown into the Nile. And what does God do? God gets a baby put into the Nile and brings him out of the Nile to be raised up in the very household of the man who is trying to kill the Hebrew babies. Raised by Pharaoh's very own daughter. Can you hear the incredible, world-changing reversal there? Makes you think of that line from Genesis that Joseph says, "What you intended for evil, God intended for good." God is at work. Wait for Him. Watch for Him. Trust Him. He will bring great reversals. Now, perhaps it won't be for you. Perhaps that suffering and difficulty will go on for you. But God's plan will to bring goodness and salvation through you to others. See, God is at work. And His plan through Moses was to bring about a new creation. Moses is a new act of creation ready for a new salvation. Who does that make you think of? It should make us think of Jesus, shouldn't it? And what the parallels here are incredible. He was born under a tyrant king. And when that tyrant king found out about Jesus, what did he order to do? That all the baby boys in Bethlehem should be put to death. And where does Jesus flee with his family? To Egypt. So Jesus is redoing the Moses story. But Jesus is greater, isn't He? For He's not just the son of Levi priests, but actually God came took on human flesh. God the Son came and took on human flesh. Why? Well, for a great reversal, for a great salvation, for all those who fear God, and to bring a new creation. So what does that mean for us? Well, Eliza beautifully read 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 7. Have a listen to this pattern. See, God is fulfilling His promises. God is at work. Well, what might that mean for His people? Have a listen to the Apostle Paul as he summarizes his ministry. But we have 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 7. But we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that the all-surpassing power is from God and not from us. We are hard-pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed. We always carry around in our body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be revealed in our body. For we are alive, are always being given over to death for Jesus' sake, so that His life may also be revealed in our mortal body. So then death is at work in us, but life is at work in you. The Apostle Paul's definition of #blessed is that suffering and difficulty and persecution and hardship come to him because he follows Jesus. And God sustains him incredibly in the midst of that. And out of that, life flows to other people. And he says, following Jesus is death to us, but life to you. Hashtag blessed. Can you imagine that paradigm for yourself? That as suffering and difficulty and hardship come on you, that God is not against you, but God is doing something greater through you. God perhaps is letting you experience a taste of the death of Jesus, if you are a follower of Jesus, so that life might flow from you to others. And so it's this understanding that it's not that God is not at work when suffering and hardship and difficulty come, but perhaps he's the time when he's most deeply at work in you, through you, but out to others. But we have one more hope. See, because we know that there is a new creation to come. We know that this world is not all there is. Just like the Israelites should have started to glimpse, and we'll see that in the coming weeks, that God was going to bring them out of slavery into freedom. We have that same pattern and same promise and same reversal for us now. Life is hard sometimes, brutally, awfully hard. But it's not the only measure by which we must view life. 2 Corinthians 4 verse 16, listen to the Apostle Paul. Therefore we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. Can you see the perspective? The problems here are lint, dust, light, momentary. They weigh nothing compared to the eternal glory and the new creation found in Jesus. So, verse 18, we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. Since what is seen is temporary, but what is seen, unseen, is eternal. It's actually that eternal perspective. It's knowing that whatever you're experiencing now is temporary and passing. But what you can't see, and perhaps it's not pressing in on you as much, which is life with God, eternal life in the new creation. What is unseen, that's what's eternal. That's what is weighty. And there's a play here actually on words. Because the word for glory in the Old Testament is the word for heavy. It's the word for weighty. And so knowing what we have in Jesus, if you trust in Jesus, ought to weigh on you in the best possible way. It ought to fill your heart and mind, knowing that God is acting, bringing his people into a new creation. That's what will enable you to stand up and face hardship and suffering. That's what will enable you to do the right thing when everyone else around you is doing what pleases them or keeps them safe. That's what will enable you to love someone who's not loving you back. And your heart aches to be loved, but it's not getting that love. It's when you feel the weight of the new creation, when you fix your eyes on Jesus, when you know that God will bring a great reversal. So let me conclude. How should we live? We should live like God is acting. We should live like God is at work, because he is. He is keeping his promises. He is at work in the midst of persecution. He is in the midst of suffering. He is in the middle of blessing us. Live like God is at work. Live like God cares, because he does care and he is at work. Let me lead us in prayer, and then I'll open up for some questions and comments. Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth,